When we first launched Lock Horns, our goal was to update Banger's heavy metal family tree. We soon realized there were many more subgenres of metal to be added. So we did shows on speed metal, groove metal, black gaze, and our viewers kept asking, what about tech death? Tech death is an extreme and complex music style that emerged in the early 90s, when American death metal bands like Atheist, Death, and Cynic started to experiment with more progressive sounds. Today, bands like Canada's Arcspire and Germany's Obscura have made tech death their own, pushing the limits of speed and technicality. Which of these bands will make it on the metal tree? That's up to you. This week on Lock Horns, it's a debate on the essential bands of tech. Welcome back to Lock Horns, BangerTV's metal debate show. Thanks for joining us straight from the Banger Hangar. A reminder, if you're watching this in the archive, we do go live. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do so and keep pushing us beyond that 100,000 subscriber mark, which we hit last week. Okay, for a long time now, a lot of you have been asking for an episode on tech death. And this week, we're gonna do it. And to help me do that is a return guest, Calum Slingerland. Welcome back, buddy.
Great to be back, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. What do you think of these new digs here?
Wonderful. So spacious, and I feel so free.
We can spread out. It's not like Wayne's World anymore, just a little less like Wayne's World. Last time you were on, we talked Mastodon. Clearly, like myself, you have an affinity for the more complex side of metal. We like a lot of notes. Tell me about tech death and how you got into this sound.
As you were kind of recalling there, last time I came on the show, I spoke to how my love of progressive rock kind of threw me into a love of progressive metal, and that's where I fell sideways into tech death, learning that there was a subgenre out there that put technical playing and speed kind of paramount over everything else. And to me at that age, as a player and a listener, that's also what I perceived at the time to be the greatest musical trait as far as my own personal taste went. So that's where I got to digging about the genre and realizing the history.
Awesome. Well, we share DNA. More is more, I think, on this episode of Tech Death. And I want to welcome everyone that's joining us from around the world for this week's episode. A quick reminder that this week we are not talking about albums. We want to know what you feel are the essential bands of the subgenre that we are calling tech death. And as a reminder, as always, we just don't want to hear, dude, we love Necrophagist. We actually want to hear why you like the band. Joining us this week are metalheads, tech death lovers from Germany, Brazil, across the UK and Wales, and Ohio, USA. We're from elsewhere. We've got Belgium, Ecuador, Beijing, China. Welcome and good morning. Hungary, Norway, Mexico, Poland, Colombia, the Ukraine, Iraq, Slovenia, Sweden, New York City, Atlantic City, Bullhead City, still don't know where that is. And anybody joining us from Canada this week? Or maybe not. Maybe it's just strictly an international affair. Anyway, to help us guide us through this morass of material is Lisa Ladisor.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
Welcome back.
I'm good.
Your favorite subgenre.
I never get to leave. You say welcome back like I get to go home.
Well,
all the time.
I know you're a tech death lover, so we can't let you leave. I like your arrangement there.
Thanks. I went with blue.
Blue.
Yeah.
Blue is the week's color, and soon enough we're going to be running out of options, but I'm sure we will figure it out. Anyway, welcome back, or
Thanks.
Good to be here again. Anyway, Calum, let's get into this. What is tech death?
Tech death is, of course, a subgenre of death metal that marries the power and brutality of death metal with the experimental and complex nature of progressive music. Of course, more specifically, we're dealing with things like song structures. It's not uncommon for songs in tech death to change tempo, even genre at any given point. We're talking about the speed at which they play. Of course, that is a hallmark of tech death. Lots of notes, very fast, giving it almost a robotic quality in some places, as well as leaning into death metal. We're talking deep vocals, growling vocals.
What about lyrics? Is there anything distinguishing about tech death lyrics or tech death lyrics, or is it really kind of the same lyrical fare as straightforward death metal?
Not so much gore and hacking people to pieces, but more so it deals with death and a varying degree of scales. It could be, I am exhuming this corpse, or I am killing all sorts of humans across the globe via something in space. It is very different in each situation.
Yeah. And often people confuse this, I think, with progressive death metal. And this, to me, admittedly, even for a dyed-in-the-wool metalhead that lives this life day in, day out, that line gets a little confusing to me sometimes. So how do you see the difference between tech death and progressive death metal?
This is where I start splitting the hairs as well, Sam. With prog metal, that particular subgenre retains a lot of its what I would call more typical structure with regards to melody and harmony. There's also a welcome influence of things like jazz or classical music, not unlike prog rock and the forefathers that kind of gave birth to this genre there. Tech death largely puts all that to the side in favor of the speed and complexity that I mentioned before. A comment section that I was reading through in prep for this episode, one commenter kind of put it simply in that tech death equates prog metal minus its soul.
And also kind of maybe embracing the chaos a bit more. I mean, we're going to get into this, but there's there's jazz inflections, and maybe it's sort of embracing the more chaotic elements of jazz as opposed to just, say, the strict virtuosity of jazz. Is there anything in that?
No question. These players, they have chops, and they would like to show said chops off, no matter how fast or complicated it can get. Yes. Good answer.
Thank you. We like that. Yes. Okay. First step, as always, with Lock Horns, we picked the legend. And in this case, this is the band that we feel sort of without dispute is the band that gave birth to this particular subgenre of metal. And that band, in our opinion, is Atheist. And before we get into why, here's a little clip of Atheist from way back when.
Det var hos en vinnergassare. Jag är från protektionen. Rådens från blod bröd. Att jag var internationell.
Pretty impressive stuff there from 91. That, of course, is Atheist from Florida. And before we get into the Atheist, I brought in I get my little nostalgia moment. Does anybody else have this out there? I bet you don't. This is the Raging Death compilation that was released on a little-known record label called Godly Records back in '87. Little-known tidbit that Borivoy Kurgan, founder of Blabbermouth, ran this label. And why am I holding it? Well, prior to Atheist was named Ravage, and Ravage appeared on this compilation alongside Executioner, of course, who was Obituary before Obituary was Obituary, and of course we've got the legendary Sadist featuring, of course, Steve Giorgio on bass. Anyway, I digress. Needed to show off my wares there. Give me your thoughts on Atheist and why they should be credited as being the legend of tech death.
What I think Atheist did better than other bands that came out of South Florida around that same time period was kind of break the mold and take things farther than perhaps what death metal was or how it was perceived to be at the time. The record that everyone makes mention of course, with this band is Unquestionable Presence. And on that record, there was a lot of jazz influence, so much that I've heard the term death jazz bandied about with that. And from there, they moved forward with a record called Elements, in which they doubled down on that jazz influence. They also incorporated Latin rhythms, samba, you name it. With that record specifically, Elements, people were saying they took their music and death metal to what is the edge of metal, was the quote that I read. And as far as that compared to the other bands, I feel they pushed it farther and really embraced that experimental side better than perhaps other bands did.
My familiarity goes right back to Piece of Time, which was their debut record, a little less technical than the records you mentioned, but even on that first record, which of course I guess shortly followed the Raging Death comp, you got a sense that these guys had certainly the chops to take things beyond the realm of sort of straight ahead death metal, and they were definitely already starting to dabble into sort of more jazz and progressive inspired areas. Anyway, Lisa, does anyone agree out there with us, or is it just us?
No, we do have agreement, although it did take a moment for people to catch their breaths because this was a surprising choice for the legend, but we do have a lot of Atheist fans.
Okay, let's go to the board. Here we go. Atheist. Jason French says yes to Atheist. The earliest tech death band, unquestionable presence, blew my head off when I first heard it. Will Ring says Atheist need to be the legend. Death made good tech death, but Atheist made great tech death. Plus, Death is only partially known for technicality, whereas Atheist is all tech all the time. We'll certainly be getting into Death in a minute, I'm sure. Jorge de Abreu says, I think Legend should be Atheist. Although Leprosy predates Piece of Time, Atheist was the first to fully embrace technicality and death metal on record. I would agree. Leprosy, much more of a straightforward death metal record. Daniel Warnes, without a doubt, Atheist has to be included here. Between their first two albums, they took the already technical complexity of death and turned it up. I could dare say that they also made it heavier. So we got some agreement out there. No dissension in the ranks yet.
Well, if there is dissension, it doesn't matter because the legend is the immunity idol of Lockhorn.
That's right.
So it's staying whether you like it or not.
That's right. So we don't care what you think in the case of the legend, but we will move on and we will care about what you think. Okay, we got the legend on the board. Seems to be some agreement that Atheist is the one to be credited with really kind of opening the door to this new subgenre of metal. But next, we always give our guests their own choice. Calum, what band do you think deserves to be on the chart?
This is my turn to do, as Sam said earlier, go, dude, we love Necrophagist. So Necrophagist would be my choice. Of course, the mastermind Muhammad Suismez, writing their debut onset of Putrefaction by and large by himself before showing us what he could do with a full band on Epitaph in the early 2000s. If their music is not punishing you, it is creating all kinds of wonderful tension with jazz breaks and wonderfully smooth neoclassical soloing. What they've been able to achieve and the reverence that they have with only 2 albums in their discography is quite amazing. And they were essentially my gateway band into this entire genre too, so it comes from a bit of a personal place for the music, as well as the mystery of where they've gotten to now and why they aren't making music anymore.
You're definitely the first person, in other words, wonderfully soothing neoclassical soloing on Lockhorns. Congratulations. Lisa, are we going to the board? Do we have an agreement about Necrophagist, or what are we doing?
First, we're going to go to a clip for those of you who haven't heard this band or haven't heard them for a long time.
Go. Okay, I don't know that track in particular, but that is a fucking heavy break there in the middle, the tempo change. I almost had to take a break for a windmill session just on that riff. That was pretty sweet. Straight from the Opera House, Toronto, down the road. Let's go to the board. Necrophagist. Clayton Bascalcini says, as far as tech death goes, no band has ever touched Necrophagist. Such a small discography, such small exposure, but they are a main player in the genre. Alexander Van de Cave, I never can pronounce it. All right, it's only fitting that in a tech death episode, we'd have a technical malfunction. clearly we shouldn't be playing Tech Death, and I guess I was on screen there. I got busted checking my email. Hey, lots to do, even on set. Let's go back to the board, pick things back up. Returning to this comment from Corgal the Exterminator, who has a big opinion. Calum, Necrophagist will probably get on the board, but they still suck. Just endless guitar wanking, no real rhythmic complexity or energy. Absolutely nothing compared to bands like Atheist and Death, okay? Keep your boxing gloves down. Thoughts on that? Just disagreement straight up, or what's the deal?
I think it's two different periods in time as far as the comparison to Atheist and Death and the earlier bands.
Right.
I've never really found those Necrophagist records and that style of soloing to be pure wank.
Right.
There are bands that I do consider to be pure wank, but that is not one of them. And I would also,
Right.
I would vehemently disagree with no rhythmic complexity. If
Right.
you listen to some of that drum work on those records, there's a lot going on there that, again, is worth endless re-listens.
Maybe we'll call it a partial wank, and there's never been anything wrong with that. Matthew Levin's Necrophagist, a guilty pleasure. Lyrics so bad they're good. Best enjoyed with a medical dictionary a la carcass at hand whilst lying in a pit of offal. Trevi McTrev. Hi, Trevi. This band couldn't carry Chuck's jock strap. Can't even say it right. Ooh. That's pretty funny. I got to hand it to you there, Trevi Trev.
I laugh.
But you brought up an interesting point about eras, and we're going to switch, we're going to move forward here. I mean, I guess what is technical and what is death metal is obviously contingent on what period of time we're talking about. And Atheist and Death, of course, and Necrophagist to some extent coming from different eras. Lisa, what's next? We're back, you're back. You never left. You've been back twice.
I just went and rebooted everything. Then I came back.
Phone?
No, I
Check
didn't.
some email?
I didn't. Thanks to the guys behind the scenes for getting us back online, and you guys for your patience. As you might guess, a lot of people would like to talk about death. I think that's fair.
I'd like to talk about Death. Let's do that. One of my all-time favorite extreme metal bands. Full disclosure, I'm a little biased. Here we go. Patrick Sokolowski. I know that they're on the death metal chart already, but Death, basically you make a whole new genre and then you make a whole new subgenre at the same time. Death are gods, man. Robert Walton, Death is the legend, period. Their later records lay down the groundwork for the genre and remain some of the best. Thrash Maniac 99, Death is a legend because not only did Chuck create death metal, but he brought the technicality into the music that would eventually become Tech Death. HR, the Flame Blades wielder, says Death are first and foremost simply a death metal band, but there could be an argument that made as to them being prog death rather than tech death, primarily due to the sound of Perseverance. Okay, lots of opinions. Any more there, Lisa, for now?
There's a lot, but it's essentially consensus on
Okay,
this
so give me your thoughts on all this, Calum. Where does Death fit into this conversation?
I would agree with that final comment as far as relating more to prog death or more directly in line with progressive metal. In comparison to Atheist, I feel that Death were very there for the progressive element of music as far as the shifting time signatures that I've mentioned earlier in the show, but less so as far as experimentalism and breaking out from the confines that they had set for themselves when they were making records like Scream Bloody Gore, Leprous, things like that. Less of that kind of outside influence from all kinds of genres such as jazz, rock, etc.
Yeah, and I guess there's a conversation, and I'll go down this rabbit hole because I love this band, but those first three records, Scream Bloody Gore, Leprosy, probably to some extent Spiritual Healing, still fairly straight ahead, and it's not really until we get into albums like Symbolic, Human, and Sound of Perseverance where we really get to see that technical element coming in. So there's an argument to be made perhaps that Atheist was there from the beginning. Death took a while to get there, and if I get my dates right, they're pretty much neck and neck because I think Leprosy is 87, correct me if I'm wrong, which is right in line with the Atheist compilation. So really, I mean, there's an argument here, but it seems as though maybe Atheist wins out just because it's like part of the DNA from the get-go. I don't know.
It's a little more weird, and Death kind of added to that progressive element by bringing in players such as Gene Hoglan on drums. I don't need to tell you about his skills on the drums. Members of Cynic, Paul Masvidal, of course, playing on those records when they were starting to incorporate that progressive element. But again, I feel that Atheist kind of pushed that notion of experimenting a little bit further than Death did.
Yeah.
That's not to take anything away from Death, of course. Two very different bands, two very influential bands, but that's where I stand on that.
But yeah, maybe you nailed the word with experimentation, because Death, certainly progressive and technical, experimental, not so sure. There was something about Atheist where you didn't know what was coming next, and maybe they kind of just tipped the scales for that reason. Lisa, hi.
I've been wanting to gong in, but I also didn't want to interrupt your talking about Death, because I like having a job. So there's that.
I take it very personally.
So these are kind of no-brainers, I think. There's two bands that have come up that people really want to talk about that may be a little less obvious, and they're both Canadian.
Here we go.
Let's do some of that.
Okay, Cryptopsy, one of Canada's greatest extreme metal bands, masters of really quite technical extreme metal. Here we go. Progmaster 666. Cryptopsy to me is the best technical death metal band. The instrumentation is fucking nuts and are just as brutal as bands such as Cannibal Corpse. No disagreement there from me. Zgold says, everyone talking about essential tech death albums and excluding None So Vile by Cryptopsy should shut up and be ashamed. Horror Master, the amount of influence None So Vile has had on the extreme metal scene is unquestionably huge. Cryptopsy to me are the example of an essential tech death band and a great Canadian export. Reno Matarozzo, welcome back, buddy. He screams Cryptopsy in all caps. They push the boundaries of how chaotic death metal can get. Drummer Flo Mornier is arguably the best metal drummer of all time. Big claim, Reno. Bonus points for being Canadian. No dispute from us in the Banger Hanger, eh? Make sure I get that one the right way up. Give me your thoughts on Cryptopsy, Calum.
Kind of watching the live chat out of the corner of my eye, in comparison to the bands that we have above them, that element of brutality is much more apparent in their music and that lean towards it. But again, kind of the same thing as Death, where it's less kind of strange experimental influences pulling from outside genres so much as it is, let's make this complicated rhythmically, in addition to playing our instruments very fast, very difficult passages, tempo changes. And as far as song structures go, they're incredible.
It's pretty, I mean, yeah, you begin to run out of words, right, with Cryptopsy, because they are a band that just sort of exceedingly push the limits in terms of both brutality and that sort of complexity at the same time, where, you know, arguably, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, even for some of the most diehard extreme metal fans, this is a band that really pushes things to the nth degree, as they say in the UK. But definitely, as Canadians, super proud of Cryptopsy, one of our favorites. And Lisa, who else?
Small Descent.
Small Descent, Princess Scarlet. No. Cryptopsy does not belong. They're quintessential, brutal death metal. Uh-oh. We got a sub genre of death metal now.
Do we need to write that on the side, like we can start that list for a future show, maybe?
Asterisk.
Brutal death metal? Well, I need a well-founded thesis on what distinguishes it like from non-brutal death metal. But hey, I'll put it up there. Brutal DM. There you go.
Ding dong. Ding dong. Ding Dong says they can be both.
Ding Dong.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ding Dong. We'll take your word that Cryptopsy. Well, maybe we'll just put Cryptopsy and put a question mark beside it here, that maybe there is some debate, although limited, that Cryptopsy perhaps doesn't belong in the tech death category. Catching my breath, Lisa. A lot of words for a band with a lot of notes with Cryptopsy. What's next?
Well, it's a good thing I have this magnet, which means you don't have to take your shirt off and put it on the board.
We wouldn't want that.
Because we're going to Gorguts now.
Amazing. Give me that so I don't have to take my shirt off. Gorguts. Another Canadian band. We're very proud. Luc Lemay and the guys, they've been around for a long time. Let's go to the board and see what people have to say. Ivan Gushkov. Gorguts need to be here. A lot of tech death bands are entirely focusing on the technical part and forget that this is still death metal. It needs to be brutal and riffy. Gorguts are not only one of the pioneers of the genre, they also did it very well. The Erosion of Sanity is very techy, but brutal as all hell. Gorguts belong for sure, yup. Leonard Reibstein says, Too many of these bands ignore death metal's roots in primitive black metal, and for me, lose the visceral edge that is so crucial to keeping the death and darkness that is so vital to this form. The band that does the best job of avoiding a sterile, overdone sound is Gorguts. Luc Lemay is the greatest composer in metal. Interesting point there. Definitely, when metal gets very complex, there is that step towards something that's kind of very sanitized, if you will. Maybe all the rawness has been sanded off the edges. Anyway, Aaron Henry, I just don't think Gorguts are fast enough to fit in here. Those are fighting words, dude. But I don't know where else you'd put them. Good point. Unless there was an avant-garde death metal section. Oh shit, pull out the pen.
That's another one I think should get out.
Avant-garde death metal. Lisa, you like when we add stuff on the board. So.
I do like when we write things on the board because
Especially,
we want to think of the future. It makes my job easier if you guys come up with it first.
Especially when it's French, which seems suitable considering we're talking about Gorguts. Money B94, Gorguts. Brutal as fuck and technical as fuck, especially for its time. Especially when comparing to bands of their time like Cannibal Corpse and Autopsy. It's a good point. And just most death metal bands. For my money, and this is a band I've been listening to for a long time, since their very first record, similar to Death, definitely gravitated more in a technical direction as their albums progressed. Yes?
We have a caller.
We have a caller.
Yeah, so apparently they can hear us from the Banger Hangar all the way to Quebec because we have Luke on the phone.
Awesome. Let's bring Luke in. That won't work. Luke, can you hear me?
Sure.
How are you, man?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Hey, yeah, great to hear your voice. It's been a while. So I don't know if you've been watching the show at all. Give me your thoughts on what you make of people calling Gorguts a tech death band.
Maybe in the context of the second record, like Erosion of Sanity, can be considered a technical, like we're more used to, when we go to technical death metal. To me, Erosion would be our technical record, but I don't. It can be considered technical death metal for the other records, like Obscura, this and that, but not. To me, not in a guitar playing way, in a sense that a lot of notes and a lot of fast picking and everything. The perspective of being technical changed from these records. But yeah, I think we can be called technical death metal. Yeah.
Your latest record, your later records, as you've been talking about, have definitely push things further in that progressive or technical or, dare I say, sort of, compositional direction. What inspires you to keep kind of moving your music in that increasingly kind of challenging direction?
But I mean, artistically, I don't like making the same record twice, so to speak.
Yeah.
I like to go in a different direction on every record. Even you can still tell, it's us, it's Gorguts. You recognize, the language and the aesthetic. But with the latest record, like with Pleiades, we went way further layer-wise. So that's where the technicality is. Because if you take the riff for what they are, it's not really complicated to play, but the research, instead of playing a lot of notes and with very fast tempo, the research of being technical goes within the layer and the sound textures that we can come up, within one layer, so to speak. So when you add all those layers together, so it makes something like, it sounds really technical, but if you take it for what it is, it's not how the riffs are executed that the technicality happens. It's more, it got more technical within the arrangement, so to speak. Of everybody being together.
I understand. No, that's a good distinction. Do you ever have those moments where you're like, you've built something in the studio, you put it on record, and it's just like, holy shit, I've got to perform this beast live? What was I thinking?
That's a good question, because what you hear on the record, it's always, whatever we put on the record, it never depends on the technology. How can I say that? I'm sorry. It's the French-speaking guy here.
That's all right. That's all right.
Searching for the right word. It never happened in the music that, we wrote something in the studio trying too many layers, and then you happen to perform the thing and it's not working. It has to work while we're playing it, and what you hear on the record is actually what was done while we were rehearsing all together. So there's no extra tricks, executed by the technology with so many tracks or something like that, So
right.
No, we never. I never wanted the music to be caught with a studio trick or something.
Yep.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah, no, you make sense. And, we got to move on with the show. I want to thank you for joining us, Luke. And you coming from someone that's been, has been listening to you since Considered Dead. As both a musician, I've always been impressed by your playing. And
thank you.
Keep up the great work. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Take care, Luke.
Okay, bye-bye.
How cool is that? Luke LeMay
Very cool.
Just rings in from his classical composing lair. I don't know. I envision him in some kind of
somewhere in the wilds
some
of
kind
Quebec.
of Mozart-like setting. Conceiving his next masterpiece. Anyway, I digress. Where was I there? Where did I go?
I don't know. But we're back. We're back, guys. We are at 30 minutes into the show, and we do not have enough bands on this chart. So
definitely not. We've only got 5.
Let's look at the rest of the chat.
Okay. Well, yeah, we got 5. We're going for the 10 essential bands. We're going to go for 10-ish. Let's have a recap. Atheist. Legend, as chosen by us. We don't care what you think. Necrophagist was the guest choice with Calum. We've got Death, we've got Cryptopsy, and we've got Gorguts. But Lisa, I think we're getting some love for some other bands here, yeah?
Yeah, so the one that's come up the most often next, from what I could tell, is Nile.
All right, let's go to Nile. We're going to Egypt. Delicious dishes. If we don't get Nile on here, I will personally have to cast the curse of Anubis unto the banger. I have no idea what that is, but I know it's bad. Rangstan. Nile has the most technical song names. Hey, that's good. That's good criteria. Deadline 247. Nile definitely deserves to be up there. Not only is their music extremely technical, their inclusion of Egyptian/Middle Eastern instrumentation creates a truly unique sound that pushes boundaries. Rain Without End says Nile should get in just for their darkened shrines and annihilation of the wicked alone. Your thoughts on Nile, Calum?
I'd agree with a lot of the chat as far as how those progressive influences kind of come back into play for Nile, as far as both in their lyrical content and, as people in the chat mentioned, both the instrumentation and inclusion of instruments and sounds from either Egypt or eastern parts of the world. As well as being very technical, high degree of skill in that band all through their discography, and
absolutely,
I agree with their position.
Yeah, full credit to Nile. In a very crowded musical genre and only so many notes on the fretboard, you got to credit Nile for coming up with something very unique. That whole Middle Eastern, not only just the choice of the chords and the way they put the music together, but actually they're archivists, they're archaeologists. They go out and find the original sounds, which I find pretty fucking cool. Lisa, who else?
So, hodgepodge of comments from here on in.
Okay.
So, it's time to make your arguments. I am seeing calls for dying fetus, suffocation is being brought up. We're going to get to some of the newer bands, but right now we're trying to get the classics on the board. So make your arguments for those 90s bands.
Okay, well, we've got, I think, 6 that we've got consensus for. Maybe we'll just go through. There's a bit of a laundry list here. Styled Upon says, can we move on to Dying Fetus already? Mindless Studios says Suffocation. They are one of the first to do it and continue doing it today. A lot of the newer tech death bands name them as an influence along with Cryptopsy, AJT2306, Demelich, Nesfight. A record that was way ahead of its time when it was released in '93. Also, the vocals are very unique. Do you know this band, this record?
Not off the top of my head, no. It didn't really present itself as one of the forerunners in my kind of research homework.
What about Dying Fetus or Suffocation? You have thoughts on those bands? Do they belong in the conversation?
Dying Fetus, probably after their first record, which
Sure.
was similar to Death in that it was more straight ahead. Suffocation is another one of these ones where I feel they could easily lean towards brutal death metal as well.
I would agree with that. Let's see what the board is saying. Toxic Griever, Demelich or Demelich, don't know, belong here as much as Gorguts. I got to do my homework. MB Metal Motherfucker says no Suffocation. The brutal death episode's gonna need a legend. I don't know about this, maybe I'm just old and cranky, but I don't understand this. If death metal isn't brutal, I ain't buying it. Okay, we got some Suffocation here. Maybe we'll put them up here, see what the response is. Let's hear what you think. Does Suffocation belong? Are they more brutal death metal? Do they deserve to be part of tech death? I'm the devil's advocate on that. I would say no. But Lisa, what else? Should we go to the live chat here? What are people saying?
Sure thing. So one of our most vocal contributors is back with his opinion on Dying Fetus.
Corgal the Exterminator, Dying Fetus do not belong here. Not before Cynic, Nocturnus, and Pestilence. Okay, I'm comfortable with that. We'll move these guys over here with, there was one comment that thought that that Cryptopsy belonged in brutal death metal. I'm not so sure, but maybe we got some more comments on Cynic. Here, Scott Melrose. Cynic, just for making bass matter in metal after years of pissing about with root notes and having zero importance. I like that. Also, please mention Origin. Good point. One of the first tech death bands I got into. It's true, Origin, very technical, pretty impressive stuff. Shiver. I would put Death, Cynic, and Atheist as a trinity of tech death and as legends. All right. John Clements. If this was an essential albums for tech death, I'd say they definitely deserve it for focus. But if you were just talking about the genre, I think you can make an argument for dropping Cynic. Okay, do we have a Cynic magnet there?
We might. Well, we should, because they were on the prog metal episode. So
Oh, hey, well, there you go. Put it this way. We'll do the reverse logic. If Cynic isn't here, I don't know where they go.
Well, they'd go on the other chart they're already on.
Oh, shit, right.
But you can be on two charts.
Can I start that over? No, but Kiss is on multiple charts.
That's too bad.
It very much is. I don't even, why I brought that up, I apologize. Anyway, Cynic, prog or tech death? Take your pick. We love to just split hairs here on this show. Here we go. Alfredo Salvador Musmeki Fernandez. Butchered that. Suffo is Wigga's Slam Granddaddies. It don't belong. I don't know. This is like online speak that I don't. Do you even know what that means?
Could kind of decipher it if you gave me the chance.
It's also that it's in all caps, that it just, I'm a deer caught in headlights. I don't know what to say. Anyway, Lisa, I'm a bit confused here. There's not really a lot of consensus. Maybe there's only 7 bands, or maybe there's only 6. Maybe Cynic doesn't belong. I would say there's too much disagreement on Cynic. But are we going to move forward into some more recent bands?
Yeah, let's do that,
Perhaps.
because it is a little bit muddy on the chat, and there are some newer bands that are getting a lot of love.
Okay. Well, in the intro, we talked about this band, pretty impressive, Obscura. And Progmaster666 says Obscura is important for modern tech death. Every album they've put out has been great. Delicious Dishes for newer bands. I think there is a strong case for Obscura. The Germans have a specific mix of tech, death, with prog influences that creates amazing atmospheres while not sacrificing technicality. Bad Hair Day says, once again, let's talk about Obscura. They have brought more kids to tech death than jerking off to Steve Vai's solo noodling and having no friends in high school because practice is way more important. Dead silence on that one. Obscura.
No one wants to think about Steve Vai like that. Like, no.
Nor his noodle. What about Obscura?
I would agree with putting them in here as far as a modern band goes. Of course, Obscura coming to prominence after they had members of Necrophagist and Pestilence join their ranks.
Right.
Definitely someone mentioning earlier that Cynic kind of played to making bass relevant in this genre. A lot of fretless bass work going on here, not just root notes. Lots of things to play around with there. As far as speed and technicality go, they are one of the best going right now as far as kind of staying true to that side of it as far as, as opposed to more of a progressive lean.
Yeah, I think we're hitting our stride again here. I don't think there's any dispute that Obscura belongs here. Maybe with Cynic, Suffocation, you know, there's some dispute there. So Obscura, good to get a more recent metal band represented on this chart. Lisa, any other recent bands? Aggressive Tendencies, aka Bradley Zorgdragger, the man with the most metal name ever, says Arcspire. Reference my review for more thoughts. Holy shameless self-promotion. The progressive vocals interplay with the insane drumming, and somehow the incessant guitar playing doesn't end up feeling like riff salad. Nicely articulated. Arcspire. Check them out. A Canadian band. We got a lot of Canadians. It's cold winters. Got to play a lot of notes to stay warm. 285 Mr. Smith says.
You're right. It's Mr. Smith.
It's Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith.
It's not Mrs. Smith.
I like Mrs. Smith better, except it should be with a Y. Arcspire have been able to put out a radically fast technical album that still sounds fresh. Really hard to do at this point in time. Arcspire, you know these guys?
Of course, I would agree. I wish I could remember the name of their album off the top of my head in a room surrounded with other words, but I would agree with Bradley's point as well. It's quite something to watch their vocalist bend his vocal delivery kind of in time with drums and guitars, and I would also agree that it doesn't border anywhere near kind of pure wank as far as song structures and guitar playing and writing go.
Right. We have a magnet, Lisa, or are we going to write this one on the board?
Which is it? Arcspire. Yeah. Gee, it might require a writing on the board.
A writing on the board. But Arcspire, good to have some more Canadian. It's a bit of a Canadian
West Coast
conspiracy going on here in the Banger Hangar this week. Arcspire is on there. Okay, we're running out of time. In fact, we've only got a couple minutes left. Are we comfortable? Atheist, Necrophagist, Death, Cryptopsy, Gorguts, Nile, Obscura, Arcspire. It's actually looking like a pretty damn good list. Suffocation, I think we're saying no. Whether they're brutal death metal or just death metal, we'll leave that for another time. And I think because Cynic, we already had them on the prog metal chart, there may be more consensus that they belong there. However, some late contenders here. Korgel the Exterminator is back. Nocturnus for The Key. That's an incredible old school and technical record. Rangstan says Nocturnus is heavily underrated. They'd be a juggernaut now if they were still going. What do you think about Nocturnus?
I would agree as far as being underrated, and specifically mentioning their debut there with The Key. Lots of kind of more that equal balance between the technical death metal or progressive metal side of things. They were really into atmosphere with that record as well. It wasn't just kind of balls to the wall shred notes, how much can we cram in this one tiny passage of music. They weren't afraid to kind of branch out musically as well as kind of conceptually with this whole idea of space and I wish we could pull the album cover up right now.
Yeah, I remember Nocturnus coming up in our death metal episode with Blaine and talking about that sci-fi element and how that was really, especially at that time, kind of a unique thing that no one had really done. You get these sort of like E.T. sounds in the middle of a death metal riff, and it's just like, where are we?
As much as I love your handwriting, you can cover it up with that.
Let's cover that up. Let's do it for real. We got the budget. Let's use it. Apocrypha of Oblivion weighs in. I'm going to sue Banger. Won't be the first one. I'm losing my voice screaming Pestilence at my fucking phone. What do you think about Pestilence as being a tech death band, Calum?
Influential.
Yeah.
Could they place on this list? Definitely. More in line with kind of the Cryptopsy Gorguts as far as putting technical first, kind of progressive experimental elements second.
Sure.
But that's not to say that they're they're a bad band, of course. I feel they're a little more kind of sound alike to things we already have here.
I think we've got to hear more consensus on Pestilence. You know I'm a fan. I wear the shirt. It's one of the difficult things because Pestilence depends on which one you like. Because the first couple albums, much more thrashy, much more death metal oriented. But of course, they gravitate towards the prog end of the scale with albums like Testimony of the Ancients and Spheres. So it really depends on where you put your flag. Korgel the Exterminator. Pestilence should probably be on the board for historical reasons, but they are way better before they became a tech band. Consuming L Impulse, Barry's Testimony of the Ancients, I would have to agree. So if I get to pull rank, I would suggest that Pestilence does not belong on the tech death chart. I think it pigeonholes them a bit too tightly and doesn't really embrace their full catalog, whereas a band like Death, this is a band that had multiple records and had quite a big influence with their technical albums. I think probably Pestilence had a bigger influence with their non-technical albums. Sticking my neck out there, but it's my opinion. Bob Dole, welcome, Bobby. Origin, important band, pushed boundaries. Thornriz says Origin, 20 years old, extremely fast, extremely technical, one of the best guitarists and drummers in the genre. Anything else? We're getting down to the wire here, people. We got to wrap this up. Sack Blabath, 65. Origin has so much complexity coming at fast speed. Melt my mind. We like a good mind melt on Lockhorns, so we'll put them on the board. Origin. There you go. They're there.
I feel like that's like, sometimes we have bands that we want to put on, a banger and the guest, and other ones that are like super obvious. And sometimes there are surprises for us that everyone in the chat wants to have.
Yeah.
So I like when I see something like Origin show up. I'm like, yeah,
I would agree.
You guys want them there? We're going to put them there.
Yeah, I think Origin belongs. Quality band. They deserve some props because they probably wouldn't make it onto any other subgenre branch of the tree. So I'm good with that. What do you think, Lisa?
I don't know. If you guys are good with this and the chat is not like on fire, then we're
Resident
good.
tech death expert, Calum?
I think this is largely agreeable. I don't really have any issues with this.
Good. That's all we can ask for on Lockhorns is something that's largely agreeable. I think we did it. Atheist, Necrophagist, Death, Cryptopsy, Gorguts, Nile, Obscura, Arcspire, Nocturnus, Origin. Good fucking list. Good job, Calum. Thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you for having
me. Come back
me.
anytime. Lisa, Daniel, Craig, and Andrew, thank you for making it happen. We're away for 3 weeks. I'm going on holiday, not for 3 weeks, but for part of it. We'll be back then. And what are we doing? Well, essential folk metal albums. Bit of a change of pace. But to help me with that one will be Dylan Gowan. Thanks again for watching. Please subscribe to BangerTV. And we will see you next time on Lockhorns.